The following is a story lore prologue to our upcoming deep dive into the history and lore of the second layer of the Nine Hells. Please join me as I share a tale of fiends, faith, and friendship, each tested by the fires of betrayal in the Iron City of Dis. Diogenes finished the hunt deep in the jungle wilds southwest of Port Nyan Zaru, near the mighty Chultan River, Sashenstar. The kill was clean. She preferred it that way, as the stink of a clumsy death clung for days. The were-tiger was always careful to wash the stain and scent from her claw and muzzle before heading back to Naikayo, Water Road in the local tongue, a small trading hamlet on the river Tiriki. The water seemed to recoil just as she noticed the columns of smoke rising on the distant horizon. The color was wrong. It was a greasy black stain, the kind of smoke that comes from the wet thatch of kampong roofs and human grief. Her home. She ran, her feline form a desperate sprint of striated muscle and striped fur. The lush jungle seemed to shrink from the violence of her speed and near-panicked breaths. As the feline lycanthrope crested the last hill, her life unraveled. Naikayo was no more. The only home she had ever known, now razed to cinders. Bodies lay where they had fallen, either burnt or bloodied. Every palm longhouse, every canoe, all rendered to smoldering ruin. Children's masks she once carved from balsa now lie broken among cloven hoofprints cracked in the clay. Her people never forged iron, they had never needed to, but iron had left its mark. Cruel, heavy, infernal. In the center of the devastation where her home once stood, the lycanthropic paladin's gaze landed on her mother. Diogenes fell to her knees as grief found its mark. A bitter gratitude coiled in her stomach. The fire had spared her a final indignity, a minor mercy. Her body lay peaceful, eyes open to the heavens. They were opaque, reflecting the world but holding none of its life. She reached for the one constant, the prismatic amulet around her throat. It was the spirit of Haikabosa, a masterpiece of Mesroan artistry. A single perfect flower wrought from Chultan gold, its petals inlaid with emerald so deep it seemed to drink the light. At its center, a flawless aquamarine that pulsed with a faint inner glow. A gift to her father from Alessandra Ray Burton, the Tabaxi paladin and one of the 7 immortal champions of the god Abteau, who ruled the holy city of Mesro before its vanishing. They were the Bare, or Bara to some scholars, and this amulet was far more than an heirloom. She now felt its truth. A sliver of its divine magic pulsed at its heart, bound by Abteo's law of consent. Power only given, never stolen. Without willing transfer, its divinity slumbered. The necklace grew warm against her skin. The aquamarine at its core flared like never before, a soft blue glow that pulsed in time with the sorrow-filled hammering of her heart. The amulet's ethereal light expanded until it filled her mind, and the world of anguish and ash dissolved. A vision. She saw a cohort of horned Kornugon devils marching into Naikayo, their movements lacking the bloodlust of a rampage. She watched as the devils escorted her were-tiger half-brother Till through a shimmering portal of green hellish magic, catching a final fleeting glimpse before the vision faded. A single structure seared into her mind, an impossibly tall tower of black iron, piercing a tainted green sky. She knew this place. Dis, the second layer of hell. She closed her mother's eyes, the milky voids now shielded from the ruin. With hands that did not tremble, a daughter honored her mother, building a small pyre from the splintered remains of their home. As the flames took hold, a single tear cut a clean path through the soot on her cheek, a weakness she could only allow once. She watched until the last ember died. The vision had given her a target, but grief had given her a reason. Diogenes, blinded by a paladin's oath and a sister's love, never saw the hook or the lie. She only saw the bait. Till was a captive to be rescued, a vow of protection that would lead from the devastation of her home to the gates of hell itself. Yet the path to Avernus, the front door of the Nine Hells, is not a straight one. For Diogenes, it would begin in Sigil, the Cage, a city of doors floating in the outlands. The Chultan were-tiger made her way to the stinking warrens of Sigil's Hive Ward, home to graveyards and slums so grim it was often hard to tell the difference. Still, this was a black market where just about anything illicit could be found, for the right price. She would trade a small pouch of flawless Chultan gems for a forged Baatorian travel pass, and to bribe a portal guard to look the other way, a common practice if the coin is right. The flimsy scrap of parchment smelled of brimstone and carried the wax seal of Dispater's court. It wasn't a perfect replica, but it would have to do. The grieving paladin would wrap her plate armor and lycanthropic form in dark robes for the journey to come, hoping to avoid unwanted attention. But attention she would find. At the gates of Malparons that would descend into Dis, near the lair of Tiamat on Avernus, they came. They had been lying in wait, a fiendish patrol, Omnizu clerks with their diabolical ledgers of lawful strictures, flanked by Horn Cornugon and Orthon hunter devils. They barely laid eyes upon her papers before declaring the seal false, her pass fraudulent. The paladin knew this was not some random check or bad luck. Someone had made an infernal appointment on her behalf, and this was her escort. She clutched the spirit of Haikabosa, its familiar weight the only anchor in this madness. The waiting contingent of fiends escorted her down the skull-littered road. The laws of these hells forbade any mortal from walking into Dis through its gates, and so one step later, reality tore, and she was injected into the urban metropolis of the second layer of hell. The air in Dis immediately assaulted her senses, cooking the moisture from her lungs with each breath. Every surface in this molten city radiated an oppressive heat that promised agony with just a touch. Its intensity, coupled with the sights and sounds of never-ending construction and demolition, quickly overwhelmed her senses. Towering above at every corner were countless iron statues of Lord Dispater, their invasive crimson gaze following her every step. Her destination was Mentiri, an infamous prison across all of the 9 hells. Buried deep below the smoldering streets of Dis, Mentiri was comprised of 2 separate prison blocks. The first wing is called the Bastille of Flesh, where mortal captives serve sentences longer than the lives of those condemned to actually serve them. The second, a Bastille of Souls, is reserved for beings who had died in hell, their souls now held for ransom. Both wings of Mentiri fed Lord Dispater's greater machine of paranoia. They had branded her twice, once for illegal trespass, once for espionage on behalf of the Tanari demons. The charge was nonsense, but the punishment was death. Law in Dis was not justice, guilt was assumed. Any pretense of unbias was only theater. Bound in soul-forged manacles, Diogenes was processed in the Bastille of Flesh before being thrown into a cell, its misery pronounced by the clang of distant irons and the nearby cries of the broken. And she was not alone. Days bled into weeks, measured only by the changing shifts of the Barbazu devil guards and the vileness of the gruel. Hope in Mentiri was a contagion the devils worked tirelessly to eradicate. The heat, the screams, the unrelenting misery. It was a forge designed to break spirits into slag. Yet, despite this institutional misery, bonds of shared survival would form with her new cellmates. Corvinus, a drow from Menzoberranzan, was a study in stillness and shadows. A former guard serving House Bainray, he was an exile who carried the quiet dignity of one who had long rejected the cruel faith of the spider goddess Lolth, only to find the pieties of surface folk just as suffocating. The result leaving him lost between 2 worlds, a displaced soul looking for meaning. Neutrality for him was a matter of perseverance. The other was a small kobold sorcerer. His name was Balthazar, but the drow just called him Sparky for his sorcery talents that often would manifest in azure blue hues. He was from the Thunder Peaks, born to a tribe of cobalt blue-scaled kobolds who worshipped the brutal tyranny of their chromatic draconic ancestors. But as Sparky matured, something truly unheard of occurred. Patches of his scales began to shift, the deep cobalt blue giving way to the bright, untarnished sheen of metallic silver. To his tribe, it was a heresy, a physical manifestation of a good-natured soul that was anathema to their chromatic lineage. This, coupled with his burgeoning sorceress power, had been his death sentence, or rather a sentence of exile, which was often the same thing. Sparky was offering a portion of his meager rations to a whimpering halfling in the opposite cell. It was a tiny act of kindness, a rebellion against the prison's calculated starvation, and perhaps his chromatic bloodline. Sparky looked up at his new were-tiger cellmate, offering a genuine smile.
One day, I'm going to be a sapphire dragon.
From a shadowed corner of the cell, Corvinus gave a dry, rasping reply.
A fine dream, little one. Keep it. Hold it tight. They'll take everything else.
The drow didn't mock. Sparky's dream was just another beautiful thing waiting to be broken in the bowels of Dis. The little kobold smiled. His belief was a thing of baffling resilience, and the only speck of hope to be found in this prison. Diogenes found herself drawn to their strange dynamic, a silent drow and a hopeful kobold. She could tell the two were close, kindred spirits, and in time the pair would form a similar bond with the were-tiger paladin. By month's end, they would come to call her sister, proof that the Nine Hells can make brothers of anyone who share your chains. An archfiend of great patience and perhaps a Napoleon complex, Titavilus had long served as nuncio, wise counsel, for the Iron Duke Lord Dispater, ruler of Dis, and for nearly as long he had sought to gain his master's ultimate trust. Titavilus knew more than anyone that the Lord of the Second's mind was already a fortress of suspicion, and he worked tirelessly to foster and fuel the archdevil's paranoia at every turn. Titavilus is diminutive by archfiend standards, a satyr-like fiend barely over 5 feet tall, whose powers lie in whispers and influence, not brute force. He held no ambition to usurp Dispater's throne, only to exert full authority of the mind that sat upon it. For centuries he had studied divine doctrines all across the Faerunian pantheons, uncovering their secrets, searching for a key to such control. In recent years, Titavilus believed he had found exactly that in the dogma of a Chultan god whose own divine realm was the labyrinth of life. Titavilus understood what few mortals or fiends appreciated. Ubtael, the creator of Chult, wasn't a god of jungles, but of mazes. His domains hold influence of divine forces to create labyrinths, surreal mazes of the mind, even complex patterns of thought aimed to blur the lines of reality. And in the Nine Hells, such a key wasn't worth a kingdom, it was the kingdom. His insidious plan sought to leverage the power of Diogenes' Haikabosa amulet to tap into the divinity of Ubtael, to control those paths and walls of thought. In securing the artifact, Titavilus believed he could reshape the architecture of Lord Dispater's mind, turning the Iron Duke's existing neurosis into an inescapable maze of paranoia, trust, and control, with Titavilus holding the only key. To accomplish this, he needed the trinket given freely, as per Ubtael's law of consent. That demanded deceit carved from mortal weakness, a path that would be easily found in sibling rivalry. But in the courts of Dis, such plots of rebellion rarely go unnoticed. Every move Titavilus made was observed by his one true rival, Lilith, Dispater's devil consort and spy master. Where Titavilus schemed with lies, Lilith operated in the covert arts, able to cast her web of agents wider than the nuncio's whispers. Lilith had long despised and mistrusted Titavilus, and now she had uncovered the traitor's ambitious power play and understood its potential. Unfortunately, it was clear to all in Lord Dispater's inner court that simply reporting this betrayal would fail, as Titavilus had already exerted ample influence over the Iron Duke's paranoid mind. However, Lilith also saw the single, fragile linchpin in this plot, the were-tiger paladin locked away in Mentiri. The spy master didn't need an army, she just needed pawns for her counter-gambit. Diogenes' were-tiger half-brother Till was raised amid the quiet resentment of belonging to his father's second family and the knowledge that the patriarch's truest pride lay at the feet of his half-sister, only amplified by the divine gift of the Haikabosa amulet. It was this jealousy and bitterness that would be exploited. Titavilus whispered his packs of promised lies and Faustian bargains through the visions of unholy grimoires and dreams of opulent temptations, each soaked in sulfur. Till, as it turned out, was an easier mark than expected. He asked for no grand empires, only the petty pleasures of wealth and mortal comforts. But all things come with a price. The trade was his loyalty. To play his part in the bargained ruse, Till would be taken to the cell of Diogenes. a masquerade of deceit, a traitor puppet dancing from infernal strings, wearing manacles light as parlor jewelry. His gaze fell upon the amulet around her neck, and for an ephemeral flash, his mask of concern slipped. Diogenes saw old resentment flare in her brother's eyes. It was the same familiar look he'd had as a boy when their father praised her tracking skills, a stark reminder of a father's love while he'd been giving nothing but a sibling's shadow to live in. The bitter moment passed as quickly as it came, replaced by a desperate plea. He spun a tall tale of a bargain made to save her, praising their good fortune found in his captor's offer, a pardon of the death sentence granted for her participation in a blood sport called the Trials of Iron and Flesh. Win glory, and she would leave Dis alive and save her brother. His eyes sparked a hint of betrayal while urging his sister to release the spirit of Hykabosa's power to him in case she were to fall in battle. For a frozen second, the paladin in her saw it. It was the trace scent of a lie, faint but foul. But then he looked at her, his expression softening into the familiar face of the boy she'd protected since he joined their family, and she crushed her suspicion as cynical. He was the only family she had left. She spurned his request, but the weakness of familial bonds would soften her stance, agreeing to a contingency. She would cast a ritual variant that would only perform a divine transfer, marking Till as her heir, in the very specific circumstance of her death resulting from the righteous act of cleansing evil from this vile blood sport. Satisfied in his deceit, Till kissed her cheek as brother, wishing her good fortune while hiding the gallows smirk as her betrayer. The trials of Iron and Flesh to come would test Diogenes and her new companions. Such spectacles were rare in Dis. Lord Dispater preferred the slow, grinding torment of his eternal work crews and the silent despair of the Bastilles of Mentiri. But these trials were the work of Titavilis, a gaudy display of his expanding influence that had the more traditional of fiendish kind whispering of Dispater's weakening grip on the Iron City. It was all an audacious and dangerous game, but the nuncio to the Iron Throne was nothing if not a gambler. The trio would be armed for the battle to come, but just barely. Mentiri's guards had predictably confiscated the tools of their trade during processing, a systematic stripping of their power and identity. They had taken the Drow's twin daggers first, exquisite blades of obsidian-hued Drow magic, enchanted to move as extensions of his will, blades that would drink in the shadows. In the hands of Corvinus, they sang a silent but deadly ballad. The Drow was also stripped of his enchanted armor, supple leather imbued with umbral magic that allowed him to move as silent as a still night. In their place, the guards mockingly tossed him 2 lengths of pitted, ill-balanced steel that felt clumsy and foreign in his grasp, barely worthy of being called blades, along with scraps of stiff, boiled leather that would chafe and squeak with every step. Corvinus was a master of umbral shade, now forced into the light, his grace and lethality traded for the crude tools of a Baldur's Gate back-alley scoundrel. Sparky's loss was one of connection, his staff of petrified ironwood which helped channel the chaotic storm of his innate sorcery, along with the kobold's treasured sapphire rings, each mined from his home in the Thunder Peaks, vanished into a lockbox. Even his robes, woven with subtle protective runes, were taken, leaving him with a tattered smock and a crude iron focus. He still held his sorcery, but Sparky's ability to focus and channel its power was diminished. Once a controlled fury, now wild and predictable, as dangerous to wield as it was to face. However, a most curious omission occurred during the Were-Tiger Paladin's disarmament. The Barbazoo guards had taken her magnificent adamantine plate, its teal enameled surface reflecting their righteous fire one last time before being hauled away. It had been her fortress, an armored shell capable of turning aside the claws of demons and the blades of assassins. Her holy greatsword, a consecrated weapon that hummed with a celestial warmth in her grip, was seized, replaced with the rusted iron of a commoner's blade, heavy and profane, its edge dull and its balance clumsy. Yet as a guard's clawed hand brushed the heavy Hykabosa amulet at her throat, it recoiled as if stung, or under orders from some unseen directive. They had taken every tool of war, every ounce of her formidable defense, but had deliberately left the one thing of true power. In Dis, she knew such mistakes were not made by chance. This wasn't an oversight. It was a move in a game she didn't yet understand. The start of the trial of Iron and Flesh began without the clash of steel. The three companions found themselves sealed in a long corridor chamber that offered nothing but heat blistering at the skin and runes crawling across rusted iron. The silence did not last. A maelstrom of psychic voices filled their minds, rising in volume to that of a screaming god. Blades were worthless against the mind-bending assaults, quickly debilitating the trio. The agony was not found in the visible, but in the mortal sorrows of souls condemned. Sparky would be the first to realize they were trapped inside some form of conduit for energy released in the soul extraction process. The kobold sorcerer dropped to the floor and pressed his palms to the metal, feeling the agony of a million souls vibrate throughout the chamber. Drawing upon his innate powers, the little kobold let his sorcery align with the channeled souls. Drawn to the living pulse, a small fraction of the soul energy began to coalesce and swirl around him, transmuting a siphon into shield, partially blocking the psychic assault. The kobold's power was limited, but it was enough. With a final surge, he directed the energy protecting them with enough force to blast open their exit. The trio scrambled out, battered but unclaimed by Hell's machinery. Sparky collapsed, panting, his magic nearly spent, but his friend spared. Unfortunately, surviving the first trial would provide little respite, only leading them into another narrow chamber where a steel phalanx blocked their exit approximately 100 feet away. 8 fiends, clad in thick plate armor, identical masks bolted to their flesh. They turned in unison to face Diogenes and her friends, Maragon Legion Devils. They moved as one, a walking fortress of interlocking shields, marching with a rhythmic, fearless cadence, the clanking metal echoing off rusted walls like that of a death knell keeping time. The paladin met their advance, her sword rang against the wall of shields in a desperate peal of metallic thunder as she attempted to break their line, but the wall held as she cursed the prison-supplied commoner's blade. The unity of their movements, along with a severe lack of adequate gear, began to drive the three backward. The heat radiating from their shields was so intense it singed the were-tiger's fur. The Maragon soldiers fought as a single entity, a devil of 8 bodies and 1 will. Sparky, still depleted from the soul extraction chamber, managed to release minor bolts of force that slammed into the phalanx, but the Legion Devils barely seemed to register the impacts. They continued to push the trio back, step by grinding step, their spears thrusting out from shield slits with impersonal precision. There was no malice in it, no passion, and no fear or remorse. A spear tip caught the were-tiger in the shoulder. The pain was sharp as blood stained her fur. She saw the drow trying to flank them, but the chamber was too narrow and the Legion Devils moved as one, adjusting their angle, never giving an opening. Sparky called out a warning as a series of floor gates behind them began to glow molten red. The devils were herding them onto a killing floor. That's when Corvinus changed tactics. He stopped attacking, instead now watching, his eyes narrowed, calculating. He held up one of his daggers and threw it. The blade spun in over end, glancing harmlessly off a Maragon helmet. But for 1/2 second, the Legion unit flinched and its shield dipped just a fraction. It was a gap measured in inches, but that was all he needed. Corvinus was already in motion. He slid low under the spear thrust, hugging the searing iron floor. The dullness of the cheap blade could not hide the drow's skill, finding the unarmored joint of a knee, then the exposed skin of an armpit, followed by the soft spot under a fiendish jaw. He moved like a surgeon, severing muscle and tendon. The lead Maragon fell. The phalanx, its strength residing in a sum greater than their parts, broke, their unity shattered. Now they were just 7 devils, wounded and confused. 7 devils that could be killed. It was only a scant few days later that the friendship trio engaged in their third trial. The arena's braziers extinguished in unison, plunging the vast space into an unnatural blackness that took Diogenes and her friends by surprise. A profound silence fell, a quiet that was somehow heavier than the noise it replaced. This would be a different kind of test, and the deck was stacked against them. First, a flicker of movement in the periphery. then a glint of steel. Corvinus spun his dull blades ready, but struck only empty air. From the impenetrable magical darkness, a whisper slithered, audible only to him.
Try again, loath's little runaway. The shadows you think you've mastered are our home.
2 umbral killers, Dogai assassin devils. The drow's face hardened. The devil's words cut deep as any blade. The minutes that followed were a masterclass in stealth tactics. The Dogai were ghosts. They used the absolute darkness to their advantage, teleporting between pockets of shadow, never attacking the same direction twice. Corvinus, a master of stealth, still found himself outmaneuvered, his own element turned against him, a spider caught in a web he couldn't see. Sparky tried to counter with mitigating spells, but his concentration was harassed at every turn. Diogenes swung her rusty blade at the black void, the paladin's formidable strength useless against enemies who refused to engage. A gasp of pain came from Sparky's direction, slashing cuts weeping a blend of the kobold's blood and the dark viscous toxin from the Dogai's poisoned blades. The feline paladin began to cast a heal when a strike from envenomed shadow steel scored a deep line across her back. The venom was a cold fire in her veins, dulling the senses. The already inferior sword now felt heavy. The Penumbra Devils were too fast, their coordinated strikes near perfect. Were there 2 or 10? The paladin began to wonder. Their silent assault was designed to bleed, poison, and break the spirit. Diogenes heard Corvinus curse the darkness, a rare breach of his stoic facade, and she smelled the foul, acrid poison welling from Sparky's wounds. This was how they would die? Dismantled cut by cut from unseen devils? Diogenes' village home was gone, her family decimated, her tribe slain. She looked into the suffocating blackness where her new friends were being bled dry as she realized her tribe was right here. A flashback to her childhood suddenly surfaced in the were-tiger's mind. Memories of stalking a shadow cat in the Chultan twilight as a young cub, her father's patient voice reassuring the growing hunter. Remember, my young huntress, the eyes can tell lies. Trust the scent on the air and the tremor in the ground. They are your truth. She snapped back to dread reality with a new clarity. This was her fault. In her quest for righteousness, Diogenes had shamed and shackled the most intimate essence of her being, repressing the primal rage in her lycanthropic blood, treating it as a flaw to be tamed rather than an apex power to be unleashed. The paladin fought with honor, yes, but the tiger fought to survive, and in this moment, survival was most needed. With a roar that was both prayer and curse, the feline were-tiger tossed her rusted blade aside. It skittered across the iron floor, its clang a symbol of strategy abandoned. She fell to one knee, clutching the Haikabosa amulet as she called out to Abteo.
Hear me now, Lord of the Labyrinth, Father of Mesro. I see now the maze lies not in this hellish prison, but inside my own conflicted soul. I have followed the straight path of the Paladin's Oath, ignoring the jungle wilds of my bloodline. But I was wrong. There is no choice to be made. The true path lies in finding balance on the razor's edge between. Let me walk it now, Abteo. Let me become your sacred predator of savage hunger and righteous heart.
A low growl started in her chest, the sound of a primal oath catching fire as divinity answered with power, raw and untamed, surging through the feline lycanthrope. Her vision blurred, but her other senses exploded. The world became a map of scent and sound. She could smell the cold iron of the Dogai's blades, the unique venom they carried. The were-tiger could hear the whisper-soft scrape of their leather boots from 20 yards away. The darkness was absolute, but the heat was not. She didn't need to see her enemies, she needed to find them. To attack not where the enemy stands, but strike where they must go. She tracked the devil's unseen movements by the displaced heated air left in their wake. One of the devils materialized behind Corvinus, blade raised for a killing blow, but it would never land. A fierce blur of orange and black intercepted the Dogai, claws tearing through the assassin's cloaked form. The shocked devil let out a gurgling cry. At that moment, a searing light like that of a new sun erupted outward from the spirit of Haikabosa. Shadows were erased, annihilated in Abteo's divine glow. and for a single moment, these hells knew the brilliance of dawn. The light washed over her friends, healing wounds, flushing the venom from their blood, and the prismatic rays exposing the final assassin. Its cover now burned away, no longer hunter, the Dogai was simply prey. Diogenes' claws smoldered with holy smite as she struck it down with righteous retribution. As the brilliance of celestial light subsided, Corvinus reflected on the divine act he just witnessed. He had long dismissed the gods, Lolth and the surface deities alike, as puppeteers pulling the strings of foolish mortals. Yet he could not deny the devotion of the paladin's faith, nor the sanctity of Abteau's answer. It was not a piety he could ever share, but for the first time since leaving the Underdark, the Drow recognized such beliefs as something other than a leash. It was a memorable victory, their double rations that evening tasting like a feast, and for a day they each allowed the blasphemy of hope to linger, that freedom was only one more victory away. But in hell, hope is often bait, told in a language of lies. Late the next evening, the shadows would grow in Mentiri, an unnatural pooling of darkness thick as spilled ink. It coalesced, drawing inward until it formed a feminine silhouette. From the void stepped a matronly devil, an air of charm as counterweight to a presence that radiated from her like the intrinsic heat from Dis's iron streets. She offered no name, no greeting, but Diogenes would later learn the devil was Lilith, master of spies and consort to the archdevil ruler of this hell, Lord Dispater. Her gaze, cold and ancient, swept over them in appraisal and judgment. She lifted a single, clawed hand, a wisp of shadow detached from her fingertip, slithering through the air like a serpent made of night. It flowed through the bars of their cell, silent and purposeful, and touched Diogenes' manacles. There was no sound, no click of tumblers. The soul-forged iron simply disintegrated to rust. The shadow wisp then moved toward Corvinus, then to Sparky, dissolving their bonds with the same effortless contempt. Her gaze, now fixed on the lycanthrope paladin, held a malice that seemed to reach beyond, towards an unspoken rival. She spoke in an ethereal tone, though Diogenes could not determine if the devil's words were carried by voice or thought. Regardless, the message was delivered with unmistakable clarity. The trio would find no freedom in their final trial, only the blades of a dozen winged Erinyes. There was, however, a path back to their own world. Tytavilus held a private one-way gate in his sanctum. The were-tiger champion of Abteau sensed this devil mistress wanted to ensure the Haikabosa amulet was not delivered into the hands of her fiendish rival. The devil's lips curled into a smile that held no warmth, only the rapacious edge of a drawn blade. She didn't need to explain her motives. The animus was undeniable. They were not being saved, they were being used. Without another word, the fiend carved a sigil onto the floor, unlocking their cell as she dissolved into the receding shadows. From the infernal symbol left behind, a thin line of arcane mist hung just above the floor. It pulsed with a faint rhythmic shimmer, leading down a dark, silent corridor. The trio understood. They had been shown a path, but one with an approaching expiration. The misty line led them through corridors normally patrolled by Barbazu guards, now absent from their posts, its guidance directing them to a stone vault holding their confiscated gear, its heavy door standing open as if expecting their arrival. As the trio armed themselves, they could not shake the reality of the events that transpired, their silence more suffocating than the prison walls that had surrounded them. They were freed from their chains, but now shackled to a far more dangerous bargain. The ethereal mist, their silent guide, finally dissipated as the three fellows reached what appeared to be the antechamber of Tytavilus, a workshop of infernal horrors containing various experiments in the fusing of organic fiends and profane dark magics. At its center stood a colossal fiend of rumors and myth, a brazen devil, or at least some unholy amalgamation of one. Encased in the familiar armor of Asmodeus's own Mal'Shem guard, but holding none of its majestic form. This abomination was a hulking monstrosity that eclipsed 20 feet in height. The creature was a failed experiment of the Blood War, an attempt to harness the power of a Goristro demon purged of its abyssal chaos and bound to the lawful strictures of hell. The Tanar'ri terror stood motionless, its hell-forged brass armor adorned with runic symbols of lawful evil origin, shackled from the ceiling by 4 thick, infernal chains, its head bowed as if in slumber. Beyond the armored brute lie their destination, 2 immense doors forged from a single seamless sheet of obsidian-veined iron. This was the threshold to Tytavillus's inner sanctum, and hopefully their escape. Seeing the beast dormant, the 3 chose an approach of stealth, hugging the chamber walls to bypass the still terror when Sparky's foot landed on a nearly invisible pressure plate. With a groan of stressed metals, the creature violently awoke, its chains sparked before snapping, whipping through the air like incandescent metallic serpents. The abomination's gaze fell upon the trio, one eye burning with the chaotic rage of the Tanar'ri, the other with the cold calculation of the Batazu. The monstrous bellow of both grinding metal and tearing flesh that followed only confirmed that this unholy amalgamation of chaos and law was as much prisoner as guardian. Free from its bindings, the brazen beast charged, its lumbering movements a conflicting blend of wild demonic lunges and rigid tactical strikes. The party engaged, the power of their reclaimed gear a stark contrast to their prison rags. While Corvinus' blades sought gaps in the brass plate, Diogenes' smiting claws raked across its armored leg. The screech of metal on metal a piercing shriek. The strike left deep furrows in the brass, but did little to slow the beast within. The Sentinel was an engine of fused and competing ideologies and energies, its internal strife making it dangerously unpredictable. As the battle raged, Sparky believed he found its weakness. When the hulking brute executed a disciplined maneuver, certain runic symbols would blaze with power, but when it lunged with reckless abandon, the same runes flickered and dimmed as if struggling to contain the rage inside, the kobold believing the runes were exerting control over the demon of chaos. Communicating his theory, the team's objective shifted. They were no longer fighting just a monstrous Tanar'ri, but the infernal system that bound it. Corvinus, able to mount the creature's back, drove a dagger deep into a large rune on the Sentinel's shoulder. The rune sparked and overloaded with a flash before going dark, and for a brief second, all the runes across the fiend's body flickered, and the creature stumbled, confused, its chaotic and lawful movements falling out of sync. Soon after, the shoulder rune reignited, as whatever network of runic control held the demon in check stabilized. But they had deciphered the code. The runes were a linked circuit. Disabling one only temporarily destabilized the others. So a new strategy formed without the need of words. Corvinus positioning the beast into reckless swings that exposed runes across the creature's limbs and back, while Sparky began channeling his powers into a volley of guided azure missiles. With near-perfect timing, the apex were-tiger launched herself at the fiend, her claws glowing with the full smiting power of her oath. She ignored the flailing limbs and slammed into the abomination's chest, driving her divine claws into the center chest rune just as Sparky's magic missiles found their mark. The overload was instant as a shockwave of uncontrolled energies followed. Each rune sputtered and dimmed as the magic of domination and control collapsed entirely. Freed from its lawful prison, the Goristro's chaotic red eye turned on the massive iron doors of Tytavillus's sanctum, the source of its torment. Ignoring the party completely, it lowered its head and charged full speed, a battering ram of demonic fury. The antechamber shook as the Tanar'ri terror slammed into the doors again and again, its brass form buckling with each impact, black ichor leaking from the torn metal and cracked seams. With a final, morose crash, the abyssal fiend smashed through the massive doors, its own body breaking in the process, leaving a breached gap of twisted metal into the Nuncio's chamber beyond. The 3 allies quickly rushed past the fallen Goristro and into the inner sanctum of Tytavillus, looking for their escape from this hell. The sinister archdevil wore a mask of undiluted rage at the violation. Surprised not at the assault, but the assailants, Tytavillus immediately understood their intent. He glanced at the 3 prisoners before turning his focus to the portal behind him, casting an arcane distortion to cut off their escape route. They were out of time, with only precious seconds before the gate would close. The three began a desperate but hopeless sprint. Corvinus first, swift as a knife, the paladin close behind, but Sparky soon slowed, his eyes focused on their escape gateway as his lips began to tremble with ancient words born of dragons. Diogenes turned, her eyes capturing what her mind refused. An azure glow began radiating from the selfless sorcerer she had grown so fond of. Sparky met the were-tiger's gaze as the growing light reflected in her now tear-filled eyes. A serene, heartbreaking smile touched the face of a kobold that successfully defied his evil nature, rejecting his tyrannical bloodline to find affection, friendship, and family amid the hostility and corruption all around them.
I spent my whole life dreaming of what I would become, but I never realized the dream wasn't for me. It was for both of you.
With a nod, Sparky closed his eyes and began a deep concentration. The air in the chamber crackled with psionic energies and something other than sorcery. Was this the power of belief or will, divine intervention, or just wishful delirium? Diogenes could not know, but for one stunning moment, a culmination of something or perhaps everything saw the rules of the cosmos broken. A single wish tearing its way into a reality that could never hope to sustain it. In a fleeting glimpse of draconic divinity, the little kobold sorcerer, whose faith never wavered, bloomed, his scales fracturing to make way for wings of raw crystalline magic as Sparky manifest as a majestic sapphire gem dragon, forged of psionic truth. The impossibility of this transformation was not lost on any that witnessed the surreal events that transpired. Perhaps, Diogenes thought, faith alone can move mountains, or, in this case, hold open a metaphysical gateway. With draconic words of power, the closing iris of the portal gate wrenched open, stable and silent, a perfect silver mirror. Titavillus could only stare, his fury now replaced by a profound disbelief and perhaps, for the first time in millennia, a spark of fear. It was glorious to behold, but Diogenes also knew it was the end of her friend. Hell had no place for such cosmic beauty. The sapphire dragon turned its magnificent head to look upon his awestruck family. Sparky met the reluctant gaze of his friends with a knowing nod as a telepathic whisper brushed their minds, filling each with a single thought: live, remember. A final proclamation as the stolen cosmic divinity demanded its payment. The sapphire dragon fragmented into a million grains of glittering azure dust, carried towards Diogenes on a non-existent wind. Only moments later, the chamber was filled with a new fiendish authority. Flanked by Dispater's iron guard, Lilith entered just in time to catch the sight of Titavillus' plot of betrayal unraveling. A sinister smile stretched across her face as the matronly devil caught the were-tiger's eye. She held a look of certainty that spoke as clear as any words. Lilith chose to spare her, this time. Not for any trace of kindness or even respect, just circumstance. She simply had more animus for another as the Malebranche war devils closed rank on Titavillus. Before the thought could root in her mind, the final pulse of Sparky's sacrifice pushed Diogenes and Corvinus through the portal. They landed on the soft earth of Faerun as the portal snapped shut behind them with the sound of a breaking heart. As she stood, something pulsed in her clenched hand where the remnant dust of Sparky's surreal ascension had gathered. In her palm lay a perfect, brilliant sapphire. It softly hummed not of victory or even sorrow, but of something honest and true, remembrance. One brother betrayed her, another had died to prove the power of belief. In the end, little would change beyond the gates of perdition. Dis still shifted, its paranoia endless, its iron eye still watching. But sometimes, sacrifice lasts long enough to actually matter, and for Diogenes, that would have to be enough. Almost a year had passed. The Port Nyanzaru's sun was warm on her skin. Diogenes stood in the quiet plaza, watching as the brassmiths finished their work. As she waited, her thoughts drifted back to Sparky's final words of thought: to live, to remember. She often reflected upon their meaning, the noble kobold's true intent, to never forget him or his brave act, perhaps. Or maybe it was less about Sparky and more about the family he left behind. a sincere instruction to remember their friendship but not be shackled by the sorrow of such sacrifice, to live on, to carry the sacred flame of hope out of that terrible place. With a single rope pull, the canvas fell away to reveal a memorial. It was not a grand statue, but it was most significant. A simple, elegant spire of polished silver and brass, and set at its peak was a single, flawless sapphire. A warm smile touched her lips as a blaze of brilliant blue caught the sun's rays. The plaque at its base did not speak of a dragon, a sorcerer, or the horrors of the 9 hells. That was for her and Corvinus. For Sparky, who dreamed bigger than the sky above and proved that the smallest light of belief can defy the greatest darkness. From the shade of a nearby alley, Corvinus watched the champion of Chult trace the inscription's words, each sharing a warm smile. For years, the drow had cultivated a perfect neutrality that kept him safe from the poisons of pieties and fates. He had thought that was freedom. But witnessing Sparky's belief in the impossible had brought with it a new realization. Better to honor his memory than to serve nothing. And so he would remain, always in the shadows, but always near, to protect the one other person who understood the impossible sum of that final, selfless act. He owed the little dragon that much. Diogenes absently touched the Haikabosha amulet. The metal was cool. Her trial beneath the Iron City was a closed chapter, but she knew the story was far from over. The 9 hells never forget.